those were active a few years ago when the car dealership went there. They put a trailer there and had Guthrie's had their car dealership there. At that time, the property was owned, I believe, all by RP. So they did redo the sewer line at that time back to the corner at Fritz Street. The property was sold at some point to the Zerlinis, and I believe they were under the impression that it did have water and sewer, which it does. However, it does not have what we would require now, which would be 3 separate services for the water, which we plan to put in, assuming that there was an easement along the south edge of the property where the existing lines are. There is not an easement there. I think they have tried to acquire an easement. It has not been agreed upon. And as it stands right now, we cannot put a additional water line across that property without easement. So the question is for the business there is, where to go now, I guess, with the problem of, they have utilities, but the problem would be if there were the water line was to have a leak and we needed to dig it to repair it or replace it. There is no easement to allow us to do that. And if the sewer line, which is under the, that stays as property of the business owner or homeowner, whichever the case might be, those stay their responsibility. So if the sewer was to break back up, if it was to back up, they could clean it, but they could not dig it to make a repair on RP's property as it stands right now. So there is some legal issues that remain for both the business there not having easement across that property, if they can legally keep them from having that easement or having services across the property. Is that explanation enough?
I got a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Are we saying that the easement will be on RP Lumber's property?
Yes, the easement would need to be where the existing lines are, plus an additional about 10 feet, because if we were to run new water line, we have to be 10 foot off of the sewer line. There's other utilities already there, so they were trying to acquire a 25-foot easement to allow for the existing utilities and a new water line to go in there. So yes, the easement would be between RP and the Zerlinis, or if the city were to acquire easement for the for a water line, then we would need approximately 10 foot of easement to get a new water line into. But then the issue would still remain for them for the sewer line.
Okay, from what I understood from a meeting before, that RP Lumber didn't want to give up that easement property, or they didn't want to, the Zerlinis to tap into the water line and sewer line?
They're already there. They're already there. The utilities are. They were not receptive to the easement, from what I understand. Yes.
Okay. Now, let me ask one more question. Is there any other way around it, or do you have a recommendation?
I don't know that I have a recommendation. I have a couple of ideas that could allow them to open at this point. It would not allow it would allow more time for a solution to be found, either in an easement or getting them water, sewer in a different direction. And that would be to use the existing 3/4 inch line, excuse me, branch it off into 3 to allow water to each of the 3 businesses that would be there. And then that would allow them to be able to open, but yet they would still need to pursue an easement or another route for additional water.
So that would be a
Second,
temporary fix.
yes, but it would allow them to not delay in the opening of their building. The
Okay.
second would be to acquire an easement from an adjacent property, which would be Mr. Mack's property, and try to run new water and sewer up that easement, which the water would not be as big of a deal. The sewer line for the BJZ, I'm just going to say the Zerlinis for now, would be a much larger cost, as there is no sewer on Fritz Street for them to tie into. They would have to run all the way to Union Street, which is where that sewer runs now. It runs east and west along the southern boundary of the property between them and Mr. Mack and RP, and then runs north-south just east of the ditch line all the way to Union. And that is all completely lateral line, shared between RP and the Zerlinis.
All right. Thank you, Penny.
Penny, another question for you. I'm trying to look at the ordinances in the other buildings. Isn't it the city's responsibility to have water and sewer up to the property line?
No, sir, not for sewer. The sewer line is always the responsibility of the business owner and or homeowner, from the city main all the way to the building. So from their building all the way to and including their tap onto the main is the homeowner and or business owner's responsibility to maintain and cost to install if it's not there already. Water line per ordinance in one place says, as was provided, that the consumer shall be responsible for laying service pipe from the property line to the water meter, which that would mean it could stay like it is right now and they would have to run water to us. In a second place, down farther in section 3486, it says the water department shall furnish and install on the premises of the consumer. And as a general rule, when we are putting water lines into a subdivision for a new home, wherever, we would put the water meter at the property line of the business and or homeowner that we are putting it in for. But most of the time you're not crossing another property excuse me, to put that service in. There is not another property in between two. So it's kind of an unusual situation that they have here. And being as those utilities were already existing, what has caused the issue is that they were all owned by one property owner. So when they were divided, that there should have been an easement that went along with the purchase of that property.
Do we not get I'm assuming the sewer line that's there, that's running from Fritz and goes up to through the RP Lumber property to the Zuhani property, those are our lines. So do we not automatically have an easement for that line?
We do not have a line on Fritz Street. The line on Fritz Street from Union all the way to the corner, the southeast, I would say, boundary of that property comes from Union Street, as I said, on the east side of the ditch, all the way up, and then runs east and west to the Zerlini property. That is all lateral line, not city main. And that is pretty common in older areas where there was not a access, that the sewer laterals were much longer.
Where does
There
the
are other
line come out of the actual RP building?
RP, well, their line used to come out of the northeast corner and run to behind Shell on Fritz Street behind Shell. That is the farthest, I guess the closest manhole to the north, and the closest manhole to the south is at Union. There is no sewer line behind the Shell station and Union Street.
So it's the one block that's not connected.
Yes, and when RP redid the building, rather than go back to the north, the sewer is very shallow behind Shell. So that is why they ran across their own property and tied into the sewer. And at that time, they owned all of that property, so it was a legal thing for them to do.
Were we ever able to find a date on exactly what date they ran that line?
I was not, Jessica.
Yeah, because that's been part of the confusion as well, is that the local RP and the ones handling that didn't disclose that they had sold us that property up front. And I don't know, I know they dug it when we were in the process of buying the property, but I don't know if they physically tapped on before or after our actual closing date, because they ran that line in 2018 and we started negotiating with them on buying the property in January of 2018. But no one has been able to find the actual physical date of when they tapped onto it to know if it was, but I mean, technically if they're not giving us the easement, it was their line anyways. But if we even go into a legal matter and try and force this easement out of them, we're put right back into the situation of when there's an issue with that line that is clay pipe that runs all down by Fritz Street, we're back into an argument with RP of who's going to fix it. And they've already proven that they are not very pleasant to work with. So.
But they would not have sewer either. They would be without sewer as well. So yes, the question would be as to who's going to pay for it, I guess. But both properties would be without sewer if that was to have an issue. And I have, I've discussed with the mayor and Jessica both that, the best case scenario for the future would be for the city at some point as RP builds and the Shell, if they were to build new building, would be to extend that sewer up the road, and then each could at that back corner excuse me, have their own separate tap going straight out then to what then would be a city main at that point. But that does not exist right now, so it's kind of a moot point as to even talk about it.
I just got one comment, and this seems like an unusual case, but I'm thinking in the future, if we give building permits to anybody, then the city should make sure that there's some service lines going to that property where they're going to be building.
There were service lines, but we don't control the easements over other people's property. So that should have been, as I say, with the sale of the property.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well, I see what you're saying. Should have been with the sale of the property, but if we issue building permits, then we should question or look into if that particular property or whatever it is will be able to have sewer lines, water, electricity to that property. That's something we may want to consider in the future.
Yeah, but I think even at the time that was purchased, if someone was to have asked me, does it have water and sewer? I would have said yes, because it does. It does right now have water and sewer to it.
Right.
Any,
so like you said, unusual circumstances. So it probably just didn't come. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Wasn't sure if anybody could hear me. This is John. I did some research on this question today, and the law in Illinois seems to be quite plain that when something like this happens, the owner of the larger tract who broke it up, just like RP did here, grants an easement by implication to the person to whom or to which that owner sells the lot. I mean, the Illinois Supreme Court said that in a case from way back in the 50s, and there have been other cases since then. So there's no doubt that BJZ's got an easement by implication for what is there right now. The difficulty is that if we were going to upgrade, if an upgrade were needed, I'm not sure that easement by implication would extend that far. I mean, the easement by implication covers what was in there at the time that the sale was made, which was back in, I've got the deed right here. The deed was recorded May 8th of 2018. So that's where the problem would arise. If we needed to put something else in there, the Zerlinis wouldn't be in a very good position to be able to authorize us to do it. Although if it was just a question of repairing damage to the existing lines, there shouldn't be any problem with going on there and doing that. Now, RP might object, but they would be in the wrong for objecting because, as I said, the law is clear on this.
So, John, from I guess a legal perspective, what do we need to do at this point going forward? I mean, we need to protect, both the city and the business owner both. So, I mean.
Well, that's true. And we also need to remember that we've got to be even-handed of our treatment of RP. In other words, we can't favor one business over another. But what I would like to do is contact RP to get something in writing from them. I mean, I'd like to lay out what is really desirable from the city standpoint, and the width of the easement that we need and for what purposes, and write them and ask them if they would either give that to BJZ or be willing to sell it for a reasonable amount. But that's unless and until I get something back from them, especially in writing, it's kind of hard for me to know what to suggest that we do.
I can forward you the email of where they said they're not giving us anything if you'd like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I got an email saying they won't work with us, and then they were willing to meet with me, discuss it, and I got a sitter for my kids and drove all the way to Edwardsville, and Mr. Plummer met with me for 6 minutes and wouldn't even make eye contact and was extremely rude. So they're not willing to give us anything. And even, as I mentioned, even if we try to say that legally we have to force this easement, we are sharing that line from the point that RP connected theirs to it, and then it runs to the city main, that we would, as soon as there's an issue, we're right back to dealing with them again.
Well, that could be, Jessica, but I think since it's their line, I really think the way this should play out, not that this is ideal at all, but since that's their line and they sold that land to you, I think basically they implied that you've got the right to use the facilities that are there now and that they would keep it up. That's what I would expect a court to rule. But that may not be enough. I mean, since you're putting in three units or 4 units or whatever, you might need something more than what's there. And so that's harder to answer that question as to whether you could do that with this easement of this implied easement that I'm sure that you have right now.
Well, the sewer line to the back corner, to the Fritz Street corner, is new. It is plastic. It is only clay from that corner where it is shared, then going south. So the part across the property, which would be across the easement, is newer plastic line.
So
you're saying that was sufficient for all 3 businesses?
I couldn't understand that. I'm sorry.
You're saying that would be sufficient for all 3 businesses, the plastic line?
Yeah, I don't think the question is whether the line is sufficient for what's there. The sewer line would be sufficient in size for the businesses. Yes,
Right.
I think Jessica's concern is just the sharing of that line and the you know, who would repair and or replace
Maintain.
it from where they're shared. Yes.
Okay. Jessica, let me ask you a question. Is the RP Lumber, their corporate office in Edwardsville? Or do
Yes.
they have a corporate? It is in Edwardsville.
Yes.
Okay.
So, John, if we ask you to do that letter requesting that information, do we need to do that as a vote at our next meeting, or can we ask?
Well,
you-
I could just go ahead and do it. I mean, this is because this is really isn't really committing the city to anything. It's just
Right.
gathering information. I need to, Jessica, if you did you talk to Jason Plummer? Was that who you talked to?
The secretary's name is Jamie, and then they have a guy that deals with easements and stuff that's named Bruce. And then I met with, it's not Jason, it's Jason's dad.
Okay, the guy who started the company then.
Yes, yeah, is the one that I met with last. So, John, I know I asked this before, but I've never been able to get an explanation. The ordinance that I sent over that talks about when a lateral extension is ran through other people's property that the city then has to assume responsibility. Can you explain to me why that doesn't apply to this situation?
Well, Jessica, the way I read this is that, well, by splitting that land up, in other words, everything was, the city, as far as I can see, had done everything that it was supposed to do before RP Lumber had sold that west half to you. And
It was two parcels though the whole time. That's also something that keeps getting confused. It has been two parcels from what I can see back until like the 80s.
well, but
We
RP
didn't
Lumber,
split the parcels.
RP Lumber owned all of it though. And before that, Kuhn Lumber owned that west half because Kuhn Lumber owned it starting in 1989. So Kuhn Lumber, now RP Lumber owns it. So they've owned it for a long time. So I think the city had completely, with respect to the water, it completely satisfied everything it was supposed to do under the ordinances by bringing it up to the corner of their property. Now, just because they sold the west half off to you doesn't somehow change the situation and impose upon the city the obligation to extend that water line further west. In other words, we did what we're supposed to do, and our, in other words, can't give you any greater rights than it had. And so I just don't see how in the world the city would have the obligation to try to go across there just because they sold you the west half. Now, you know, the way to have dealt with that was to have put something in the deed that you got from them that addressed it. And I understand how it'd be easy to not think about that because you just assume that everything, you know, things that are out of sight and underground are okay. But that would have been the place to address it. I just don't see the city as suddenly have an obligation to extend this thing further from the west line of Fritz Street over to the east line of your property just because RP Lumber gave you that deed.
I'm too, though, still confused, and maybe you answered it, and I'm just slow to understand. But referring to that ordinance 34-203 that explains, from what I can understand, if an owner goes to the expense of extending those laterals and pays for it after completion and acceptance of that to the sewer main, that the title should be transferred to the city and owned by the city from that point. So why do we not own that lateral extension that was put in there?
Here's the question for you then. When, if ever, did anybody transfer the title to us? I mean, as far as I know, there's no record of RP Lumber having, I mean, this doesn't happen automatically. They have to transfer the title to us. And so far as I know, that's never happened.
At this point, could the city ask that title be transferred because it is in ordinances?
I want to explain something. You all need to read the definitions of lateral and the the house connections in the ordinance as well, because what that ordinance is referring to is a lateral main extension for like a subdivision. So it is not referring to a lateral house connection. And if you read the definitions, I think that that will be explained further.
Penny, I have to
Okay,
say
thank you.
that the way that lateral is used there is not a model of clarity, unfortunately.
It is not, but I think if you were to read it in the definition section, at least how I read it in the definitions, it was explained a little more clearly what the house connection, and I agree, it is not the best wording. But a lateral is any side off of a branch off of a main, and we have bigger mains that would be considered a main with let's say it's a 10-inch main with a 6-inch lateral main off of it. So it is very confusing.
Penny,
I
let
think
me ask
in
you,
the
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What's the width that we need? If I'm going to write this letter, I need to make sure I know exactly how wide an easement I'm talking about. Is it 25 feet or 35 feet? I forget which.
If it depends on whether we're talking about covering the entire width of the utilities that are there or just what is required for us to put a bigger water service in there. What the smallest easement that I think Jessica hired Nedemeyer to do the easement initially to present to RP, and that was a 25-foot easement.
So we'd have to have 25 feet at least.
25 for, which would include everything that's there, yes.
Now, has Nedemeyer actually done that already, or is he just was he just at the beginning stages? Because maybe I should talk to Pat Nedemeyer about whatever he's got before I write this letter.
I can forward that all to you of the easement and the legal description of the ground and everything that we were asking for. I had that completely done because RP told me they were willing to move forward with it if I paid for the surveying. And so I paid for the surveying and the engineer to come out, and when I sent it over to them, they quit working with us. So I have all that. So I originally tried to put it all in one easement to save the city money because I didn't think it made sense for both of us to pay to have it surveyed and engineered because that's what RP wanted. But then once we completed all those steps, it was during that time that they decided that they would no longer even give us 5 feet.
Well, they may not realize it, but they've already given you an easement by implication. I mean, the law on that's plain. So but that's the problem with that is that's not well defined. I mean, you can't say, well, it's 25 feet wide, and you might have some difficulties putting anything else in there. But if you could send me what Nedemeyer's done, I'll write the letter and see what we can come up with.
Yeah,
I got another
can do that.
question.
Go ahead,
I got
Walter.
another question. So if we get Jessica's situation straightened out, and say, I think Mr. Mack's property is down there where he got his garden there. Suppose he decided to sell that and somebody wanted to build. Would we have to go through this again?
Well, now, are you talking about putting a sewer line through Mr. Mack's garden, Mr. Jenkins? I'm not sure what you're asking exactly.
Well, what I'm saying is, if we get Jessica's property serviced, get the lines and everything run for hers, then if Mr. Mack decides he wants to sell his property to somebody and they want to build, will we have a service line there for them, or would they have to go through the same thing that just?
Well,
No,
go ahead, Penny. You know better about that than I do.
there is no water or sewer to where Mr. Mack's garden is as well. So if that property would not be sold with utilities already on it, and if somebody wanted to build something there, they would have to have easement across the rest of Mr. Mack's property in order to get utilities there.
Okay.
the group of trees next to that has also sold already, and they don't have water access. They have access to the sewer because the main comes up Union Street, but they don't have water access either, and they're planning on starting to do something with that here in the next couple of years, hopefully this winter.
Yeah, I spoke with them today, and they have no desire for water or sewer on that property.
Okay. So right now, what we're looking at is Jessica's going to send information to Mr. Long, and then Mr. Long's going to review it, and then send a letter to RP Lumber. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that is what I'm going to do. The only thing that worries me a little bit is that I know that that the Zerlinis are under some time constraints, and I have no idea how long this would take. I mean, I'll get that letter out as quickly as I can, but how soon that they'll respond to it, I have no way of knowing.
I understand.
Okay, John, I have a question for that, Penny.
Okay.
So because the easement by implication is there, as I said in the beginning, if we can find the end of the line that they were using before, we could go ahead and tie the building in legally
Absolutely.
now.
Absolutely. Yeah, in other words, they're not in a position to say that it's too bad that you don't have any water or sewer. You should have thought about that and done something else. Because I'm absolutely convinced that one case says that at the time of the sale, the easement by implication is created under facts like these. So it's not just one case that says that. It's at least 3 or 4 that I found. So I'm quite convinced that the Zerlinis have the right to use what's there. You know, it's a different question if you're talking about putting something else in there.
Right. So I'm just kind of going back to Mr. Jenkins' question in that we could, you know, in a fairly quick manner, as long as we can find the existing line, tie those buildings in so she would be able to use the building.
That's true. Now, I think in doing that, can you do that without going on RP's property? Because that would probably help to avoid agitating RP and creating a conflict here.
That's going to depend on where the end of the line is. If they tore it out while they were doing construction, I really don't know the answer to that question right now.
Well, let's hope it's right there on BJZ's land. That'll make this easier.
Yes.
So I have 2 questions. If I have a restaurant going into that 3rd suite, is that water line going to be sufficient? Because I thought it was only sufficient if I didn't have a restaurant going in.
It's just going to depend on the amount of water that's used, Jessica. I don't know that. All I can tell you is there are restaurants uptown with apartments over them that have 3/4-inch service lines feeding them now. So I wouldn't think that it would be an issue. Not what we would plan for, but I think it would be sufficient in the meantime till we can figure out something else to try to keep you from not being able to open. That's what I was getting at.
And then, John, if we end up having to run a new sewer line, so if we run a lateral and let's say hypothetically we work with Mr. Mack and it comes from Union Street and goes across Mr. Mack's garden and comes over to us, that would then allow Mr. Mack's garden to have sewer access as well if we allowed them to have a tap onto it. Per that ordinance, would that then cover that we would hand over the title to that sewer line when we ran it, and then it would become the city's responsibility for when that did develop further?
Well, I'd have to discuss that with Penny. I have to tell you that she's got a better grasp of that than I do. I find that the definition of laterals to be somewhat confusing myself. But so I would defer to what her practice has been in the past. I mean, I'd look at the ordinance again and try to parse this out. But I can't answer that question definitely, Jessica, without thinking about that and looking at everything again. I think that would be a good well, I mean, depending on what Mr. Mack, and Mr. Mack might have some things that he would like to see done as well, so you need to respect that. But that's a matter of policy for the city council to, and that, again, that depends on whether Mr. Mack would be interested or not. So it's not, it's not for me to say that he should do that.
Of course.
Just for the benefit of the other aldermen too, Jen had kind of taken on the questioning and getting information of this for Jessica, seeing so Jessica is the homeowner here. So Jen has been kind of taking that on. So if anybody has issues or questions on that, please refer not to Jessica, the older woman, but refer those to Jen, who is kind of taking this on so we don't create a conflict. And we're just trying to protect both Jessica and the city both. So I wanted to publicly thank Jen for helping.
Yeah. And Rick, Jessica shouldn't vote on anything connected with this either. I don't suppose she intends to, but.
Right. But so if there are questions, please kind of direct those to Jen as our representative on this, just so everybody knows.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Let's see, Mr. Jenkins, or no, let's see. Anything else? Anything else on this issue?
Yes,
I think that, was that Mr. Mack?
Mr. Mack, you just muted yourself.
and if issues come up, should I vote? Or should I be like Jennifer and not vote?
Well, at this point, Mr. Mack, I think you can vote. I mean, we just talked hypothetically about whether there'd be another route across your limit, but we've not gotten anywhere close to actually, implementing that. So I think that you definitely can vote on this.
Okay.
Yeah, when the time comes.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead with health and safety. Jen, you're up again.
Yay. Okay. I did not get on there, apparently, the COVID updates. So do you guys want numbers or no?
Oh, it's public anyway. We don't
Okay.
necessarily need them, I don't think.
Do you have the numbers that include all of the McKendree stuff, those tests that were done?
I do have McKendree's numbers that were reported as of September 18th. As of September 18th, they are reporting a total of 9 active cases. 3 of those are new, but they have a total of 9, and that is just for the Lebanon campus. I also wanted to report, George shared with me earlier today, you all know that McKendree held the mobile testing site in conjunction with St. Clair County, and that has been seen as the largest single day testing to date. They had 450 people tested last week, so I thought that was pretty awesome. As a zip code, we have now tested 2,145 people. That's an additional 279 being reported for our zip code from last week. We are now up to 258 positive cases, and that's an additional 23 since last week. For our congregate living centers, the Cedar Ridge remain the same with 80 positive cases and 16 deaths. Cedars of Lebanon still remain the same with 2 cases and 0 deaths. Lebanon Care Center increased by 4 cases since last week for a total of 76, and they remain at 12 deaths. So that's what I have on the numbers. The other thing on health and safety is the concern around Halloween. And I know Sherry asked me to put this on here, so I'm sure she may have a few things to say about it. But before she does, I will also say I did reach out to Barbara Holt, which is the executive director of the health department, to ask her if the county would be giving any recommendations to the municipalities on how to handle Halloween. At this point, Illinois Department of Public Health has not handed out any recommendations, so they are not either. But once those come down from IDPH, they will pass those on to the municipalities at that point. So
Okay.
I don't know what everyone's thoughts are on that.
The only thing I wanted put on the agenda for Halloween was, for some reason, and I don't know why, they've been doing it as long as I've been here, the council sets the hours for trick-or-treating. And I just wanted to have, I didn't want to wait. Usually they do it like the week of Halloween, and I didn't want to wait that long. People had been asking. So I just wanted the council to, I wanted to make a recommendation that we say that the Halloween trick-or-treating hours are from 6 until 9 p.m. It's on a Saturday this year. So that's all I wanted for trick-or-treat. I didn't want anything about the celebration or anything other than the actual time.
Well, in the past, I thought we only went to 8 o'clock.
We did, but this year it's until Saturday.
I don't think Saturday makes a difference. It's the number of hours that those kids are out on the street, and after 8 o'clock, there'll be some others on the street that we may not want the kids involved with if we do that. And I would like to see some guidance from the health department before we move forward on any recommendation for trick-or-treating. I'm not trying to be the Grinch, but we need to be cautious, because numbers, whenever there's something going on like this somewhere, the numbers increase.
Well, I
agree with you, George. I was going to say the same thing. We should probably wait and see what the health department is going to say before we make any concrete decisions.
With that being said, and I understand those comments, I'm just curious, not having any experience with this, what do we have, what are our rights as a city to tell people they cannot participate in Halloween trick-or-treating? I mean, they're walking down public streets, which they would be allowed to do at any time.
Exactly.
And if someone turns on their light, that is the normal rule of thumb, is that they're participating in that trick-or-treating. So what do we as a city, how do we control that?
We're not making a hard rule. Basically, we're making a recommendation. And because I know even when it was 6 to 8, kids came to my house after 8 o'clock, especially if they knew us. So it's a recommendation, it's a guideline, so that parents have somewhere to go. They can use it with their children, as a matter of fact.
Well, then why can't we make a recommendation for 6 to 8?
Right. I mean, because I kind of agree with Sherry. I mean, there's nothing we can do to stop it. So if something does come down from the county, we absolutely need to pass that on to our citizens. But as far as not allowing them to participate, there's nothing we can do about it other than try to provide the safest experience possible or recommendations for them.
I would like to ask that you check with other communities to see what they are doing. And with the health department, we're not making a decision tonight, it's only a recommendation night. But I would like to see what other communities are doing and what the recommendations are from the health departments.
Well, we don't have any recommendations from the health department at this point.
Not yet. That's why I think we're ahead of we're too far ahead of the game.
We're a month out, but we have a lot of people asking what to do, and I honestly don't think it matters what another city is doing. I think that if we give them the guideline of 6 to 8 p.m., then that's a guideline, and they can take it.
we look at other cities for a lot of other things, and this is a very important one with the children. I would say that we really need to consider this carefully before we make a recommendation. We have at this point 4 weeks, and if a recommendation could be made with 2 weeks notice, that's better than no weeks notice. And we need to be very cautious about this.
Sherry, this is Jenkins again. I would say when people ask, I think we can set the time and let people know that what the time is, and we're waiting on guidance from the health department before we make a final decision.
Right. We may have that guidance by next week. We just have to, you know, if we want to try it for 6 to 8, fine. If the health department say that's fine, I will vote yes for it. But we're not making a decision tonight, but I do think we need to seek out, not wait for them, seek out for the guidance.
Okay,
I don't-
let me interrupt here because we're gonna go on. Jen has already sought that guidance out. She has talked to the director of St. Clair County Public Health. We've been told by the public health folks, we don't have the information yet. We have a recommendation to go with a 6 to 8 timeframe. I mean, I think we can tell people 6 to 8, we're waiting for guidance. It's not a votable issue. Let's wait until we get the actual information.
Well, I agree with that. We can say we are considering 6 to 8. We're waiting for more information from the health department. If there's a change, we'll let you know.
Sure,
That's
you
what I
okay
was
with
trying
that?
to say.
Okay, Jess, Jen, would you put this on the agenda for next week?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anything else from health and safety? Okay, and the personnel, the discussion of hiring a replacement to run the Zoom meetings. I just have to get that information posted on Indeed, and then we'll look at doing that. The question I have, though, dealing with that is, and I know, George, you did it again tonight, you know, we're talking about somebody taking over as, in essence, the coordinator to log people in, hitting a record button, and then getting that recording up to the city hall. I almost wonder if we could turn to doing this instead of asking somebody to come in and do it.
Could somebody be trained to do it?
Well, my wife trained me, so it's pretty easy.
The difficult part of it is we would have to go every week to give that person, because you cannot give somebody control of a meeting that does not hold the license. We have 2 licenses for the city, and so those would have to be constantly changed. Even if, for example, Rick, you have a license. You are part of a license. You have a pro license from another domain. That's great. As long as you have a pro license, that's what's important. But if a person doesn't have a pro license, they couldn't control it.
And this is Charlie. I was wondering, did Teddy Sells had mentioned something at the last meeting? I don't know who he was supposed to talk with or whatever. Did anything happen with that?
Well, Teddy Sells left a message, put a group chat out there, and he is willing to do it, and he is here. He's on this meeting, and if he indicated some interest in this, and I sent a message back to him as to what it entailed, and I hadn't heard back from that.
No, I just know he had shown some interest, or whatever. So I didn't know how far that went.
Well, part of what I was looking at is not having to pay somebody to do this.
Right. If it's a volunteer, if he volunteers, yeah, fine. We can get a volunteer to do it. But you're sitting here, and I forgot to start the recording until the meeting was 5 minutes into the meeting tonight. And that's because I'm concentrating on what's going on with the meeting and not thinking about that recording sitting out there.
Okay, so Now, when you're talking about a volunteer, do they have to have this license that you're talking about? I'm not sure what the licenses are.
Well, there's 2 licenses. We have a 2 license pro account, and it is on a month-to-month basis. We have a debit card registered with them every month. They take it out. We've used up almost all of one debit card. There's some few dollars and change left on it. So I have to give back to Michelle to use however she can do it, or add to it, or add on to it. And right now we're on our 2nd debit card. And once that debit card is used up, we have to get another one and register it. It's like a credit card. The only way to avoid the debit card issue is if the city had a credit card. If the city had a credit card, then that would work, or a debit card off the checking account, that would work. But right now, we're going to be another month for we have to look at whether or not how we're going to pay for it again.
This is Charlie again. Teddy just put something out there that he was still definitely interested. So who should he contact? I guess is the answer.
The mayor is who he has to talk to. That's who does the actual hiring on this. The recommendation would be the mayor, I think. That's
Well,
who took care of.
Rich,
Well,
you're
Rick
on
is
as
the
well.
yeah.
Is this something that Luann could not do or not?
Luann didn't want to, I thought.
No, Luann says nothing, not any more responsibility.
We can't hear you, Rich.
I don't think Luann wants any more responsibility.
Right, and during the meeting, it's tough to be taking minutes, taking notes, and watching for individuals come in. I have no idea how long Luann was sitting out there waiting to be admitted, because I'm concentrating on the meeting. And I think that would be the same thing with any alderman, would be concentrating on the meeting. Teddy is definitely interested, but we're trying to avoid another paid thing.
Charlie, do you have another question?
No, I just threw Teddy's name out there because I know it was mentioned at the last meeting. I just want to know how far that went.
I messaged him back what it was, and hadn't heard from him all week. But Teddy is interested. He's indicating right now in the chat that you all can see, if you're on a video, that he's interested.
He said he'd be fine.
And he said he would be fine with volunteering. So if Teddy wants to volunteer, I can get with Teddy and transfer that license to Teddy. What's his name had? Anyway, Matt had, and Teddy can then work with it, because we can do it. Basically, it's the person has to just be concentrating on following what's happening with the Zoom, not worrying about the activities in the meeting.
So it's simply a matter of you download that Zoom meeting on a flash drive, bring the flash drive up to Luann.
Well, we can do it. It doesn't have to be downloaded. It's sometimes big to download. It actually, Luann can get a link to a website and just click on that link, and it does the same thing as downloading it.
So, George, if I could ask a question here, if I understood you right, once the meetings are done, they can be uploaded to, I think Matt does it to YouTube right now.
Yeah, the last couple have not been uploaded to that YouTube account, because I don't have access to that YouTube account. I have access to my own personal YouTube account. So if we got the login information for that YouTube, yeah, Teddy, you would just upload it to that YouTube.
Okay.
That's all there is to it. And that, you got to sit there. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes 20 or 30 minutes for it to get converted and uploaded. Depends how long the meeting is.
Yeah, the longer meetings I've dealt with in the past, I think the longest I've had was about 40 minutes, and that was several hours long on those meetings. So I'm pretty familiar with getting them onto YouTube and things like that. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty simple.
Yeah, you have to wait for it to convert to an MP4, and that takes up to 15, 20 minutes, another 40 minutes to upload it to YouTube. So that's where your hour comes in on that, after the meeting, beyond the length of the meeting. So if you're willing to commit to it, volunteering, I would be in favor of that.
Yeah, I don't have an issue volunteering, Matt. An hour or so once a week is not a big deal for me.
Is that
about 2 hours,
Is that after you get the stairs built at the police department, Ted?
That's a one-day thing there, Charlie. That's easy.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Teddy, I'll get in touch with you tomorrow. I'll get you accounts transferred.
That sounds good, George.
Okay, the other issue on the personnel issue, we'll do that at the meeting. So we don't have that old business. So the discussion on the credit card resolution, we've already talked about that. Is there any public comment from anybody in the public? The only chat is Teddy's comments already. We've already talked about.
So can we go to new business now? We don't have
And
anything from the
yes,
public?
new business.
Okay, new business be called to go into executive session under 5 Illinois CS 120.
We don't
Section
need to
2.
do that. Well, we're going to do that at the
Oh,
regular
okay.
council meeting, not tonight.
Good, good. All right. So we're not going into closed session tonight?
No.
Okay. We've got new business, we got old business. I guess that's it.
Yep.
So we need to do a roll call, right, and then get out of here?
Yes.
So
And I can do, what was that?
go ahead.
Okay. Myself here, George,
Here,
Rick,
Yes.
Jen,
Yes.
Jessica,
Yeah.
Mr. Mack,
Yes.
Mr. Whitty.
Yes.
Okay, is that everybody? Did I miss
No,
anybody?
it's Sherry.
No,
Sherry.
got Sherry.
Oh, Sherry, Sherry. I'm sorry, Sherry.
and
That's
my here is
okay.
a
I'm
yeah,
still here.
my here is a yes, actually.
Okay then,
All right.
mine too. All right, so that's it for tonight then. Good night, all.
Yeah.
Good night.
8:06.
John, are you still connected?
Yes, I am.
I just sent you the email conversation I had with RP Lumber, so you have the secretary's information, and you can read through that and kind of see how everything kind of transpired up until the point we